Well, why don't we get started? Looks like we're a couple past. We still have some folks joining, but let's definitely get into it. We've got a great discussions lined up for you guys here today. We're really going to try to take us through this next installment of Automation Insights and talk about what it really takes to automate. We have three great panelists who are doing this on a day-to-day basis, who have been successful in their programs and can really bring to you the real world knowledge of what is it really going to take to get this automation programs off the ground, and how to be successful with them. My partner and I, Brett, we talk to companies every day about how to construct their automation programs, trying to figure out the right mix of technology and experience to bring to the table to make sure that we have successful programs, right? With this, new buzzword of automation and all the new technologies that surround it. And the question that we get asked the most is, how am I going to make sure I can sustain this program, right? Where am I going to find the people, whether it be internal in my organization or external? How am I going to find somebody that's going to be accountable? How am I going to find somebody that's going to make sure that this automation and the investment that I make in it is going to bring me back a return? And that's why we're here today with our panelists to talk about, what that really looks like. If you'd like to talk to Brett and I, our contact information is on the screen here. Feel free to reach out to us. But what I really want to do is really jump into our panelists and give you guys a sense of who we'll be talking to here today, at least quickly, and then I'll let them get into the details of their experiences. So first we have Lillian Parker. She's currently the lead process engineer at the MITRE Corporation. We have Lori McBride, who's the manager of software quality, collaboration solutions, and robotics process automation at MSC Industrial Supply. And we have Patrick Erkela, the senior program manager for the process automation COE at Columbia Sportswear. As we started the session, I asked you all to think a little bit about the job that you came from, right? Or the first job that you had in your corporate life. And the reason that we did that is because we all started somewhere, and automation is so new that we all had to start somewhere else at this point in our lives. So I wanted to kind of start there with our panelists and talk to them about where they started and how they ended up where they are today. So Lillian, maybe we could start with you. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got started just in corporate life and then how you worked your way into automation?
Sure, thanks, Anthony. Welcome, everyone. My beginning job was with Computer Sciences Corporation. I was a project analyst doing financial oversight work and monitoring the projects that CSC was doing. And so that laid a really great foundation working in finance. I found myself in corporate finance for a number of years. And when I first was introduced to robotic process automation in 2018, I was working with a small consulting company to automate financial processes. So it kind of made a full circle there, getting my start in RPA with financial processes within a branch of the US Armed Forces. So that's kind of my introduction to RPA and seeing the full circle of finance.
Awesome. So this is kind of a common thread for you as you've worked in the different finance departments trying to drive efficiencies into their processes.
That's right. As I'm sure we'll touch upon, finance is a great place to introduce RPA. There are a lot of people who are interested in automating financial processes, a lot of manual labor that goes into that. And so it's a natural starting point for a lot of companies.
Right. And a lot of time processes that are already set up with real structured data, right? If anything is known about the accounting profession, right, is that they like their numbers to be accurate, right? And well structured.
That's right,
so,
yeah.
Really tees us up to have a lot of success with robotics process automation and other forms of automation, right?
For sure.
Lori, how about you? Where'd you start and where are you now?
I started off actually in IT for Blue Cross Blue Shield. I've been in IT about 15, 16 years. I started off in quality assurance, so I started off as a tester, and then moved into leading test teams and automation teams. So since about 2006, I've been either on the test side or the development side of traditional software development lifecycle, always looking for ways to improve efficiency and quicker testing. So I've always been a part of looking for ways to automate since then. And then it just grew into this. And when I started at MSC, I started as the quality assurance manager, and then we decided to bring in RPA. So this is something new over the last year that we've all been learning on the fly to incorporate into the business.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting when you look at RPA and automation from the technology perspective. A lot of it did start in QA, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get through these regression test cycles faster?
Right.
In order to prove that our product is sound, right?
Yeah, because QA is usually bumped up to the last part of the development life cycle. So they're usually crunched for time. So we're always looking for ways to still provide quality, but cut those corners where we can give quicker, give sooner to the business. So.
Right. And there's no better way to execute those manual, click intensive processes than to use software, right?
The tedious stuff. Yep.
Very cool. What about you, Patrick? Where'd you start and where are you now?
Yeah, so I've got actually a pretty non-traditional background. I was a mechanic in the military where I had a lot of exposure to Lean Six Sigma. And after I graduated from college, after I got out, that coupled with a finance degree got me onto a process improvement team at UBS in the New York City area. And maybe after a couple months, 5 years ago, they said, we're going to explore RPA. And I raised my hand and said I was interested. And just kind of went through that whole life cycle of helping to work in programs, and just kind of working my way up. So I've been at a couple banks, a utility, and now at Columbia Sportswear, where I got to come on and help build the program.
Very cool. Yeah, I've never worked in manufacturing or engineering, but people talk about there being a lot of parallels, between kind of like a mechanical background and the disciplined process kind of oriented thought that you need, and applying that to business processes. One of the ways that RPA kind of shows a lot of benefit. Do you find that as you made your transition?
Definitely. It's all really breaking down a process to the most granular level. And when you're in maintenance, you've got manuals like down to a T exactly what you should do. So it really kind of gets your mind into that process mindset. And so going to analyze processes kind of in the operations or the finance space, you really take that mentality in, and how do I break this down to the lowest level and find the best way to automate it?
Right. Breaking up those small little chunks of the process to find that task level, executable piece that can then be, performed by software is kind of the name of the game, right?
Right. And then, like, most importantly, I think it's very rare that you're going to automate a process as is. You're going to kind of chop things up or bypass, certain steps just to make it more efficient. Otherwise, if you take a bad process and you automate it, then you're going to have a bad automation. So.
Right. Yeah, that's an age-old debate, right? Drive efficiencies into the process or automate the inefficient process.
Right.
It's funny, I've had that conversation over many a drink, and I think we've come up with different answers at different times. The situation always kind of dictates it, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, whether or not you just need something done, kind of a one-time use, or if you want something that's truly going to be sustainable and scalable.
Right. Yeah. Those are key words there: sustainable and scalable.
Yeah.
Right? So speaking of that, for when you think about the sustainability and the scalability of your team, how do you staff this team? How do you find the right resources in order to, bring these automations to life and continue your program moving on a day-to-day?
It's not easy. There's a shortage of talent, with really good core RPA experience, especially on the West Coast. It's not like New York or Chicago where they've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. There's a few programs that have really just kicked up in the last year and a half out here that I'm aware of. But if you can grab somebody with RPA experience who's moving, willing to move to the West Coast, that's awesome. But we've been looking at people lately who just have really core process experience and project management experience on the business analyst side. And then on the developer side, looking for people who are really core in ERP systems, things like that, they pick it up really quickly. We've done that with a number of our resources.
Gotcha. And which tools are you using to automate with your team?
We have Automation Anywhere as our RPA tool. And we've been working with Alteryx for about 6 months as well. Just, big data transformation.
Gotcha.
And yeah, we're looking to onboard a few more, but all in time.
Right. Interesting. So, and both of those tools kind of, position themselves as kind of like low tech tools, right?
Mhm.
So it sounds like when you're putting your team together, that process emphasis is really where you're putting where you're looking for the most skills in order to make sure your program's successful.
Yeah. And I think on top of that too, really key partnerships with your IT teams. Because if there's a way to utilize functionality within the system that you want to automate on, you can pair that up with your tools as a team to make something, the most robust solution that you can deliver.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, and I would build on that as well, Patrick. I think, Anthony, you mentioned that RPAs is, new technology. A lot of people are excited about it. And now you're seeing that skill set show up in a lot of people's resumes, like, oh, yeah, I can do RPA. And so in the last team, I helped to bring in 4 developers. And, I think we were trying to prioritize candidates with really great collaboration skills and problem solving abilities. And, because I think there are some transferable developer skills. So it's important to see how are they going to work with the team? How well can they think outside the box? And can they be flexible? Because a lot of what I've seen is that a lot of flexibility is required as we're coming across different automation issues and challenges. So that was something that our team was looking for in developers.
Yeah, we were kind of on a different spectrum. So we were looking for more technical people on our group because ours is based within IT. We don't have business users developing on our team. So we were looking for people who either had, quality automation experience or a developer kind of mindset, because we were using straight direct through the APIs and we were using mainframe systems, using that connection. So we really needed more technical. So it's interesting to hear the other perspectives on the caliber of people you were bringing in. We were even on the technical side, we were having an issue finding candidates who had the experience with mainframe systems and using UiPath, which is the tool we chose.
Mm. Yeah, your use case is an interesting one there, Lori. I mean, you kind of bookend the spectrum of technology that's out there, right? Trying to use like a brand new tool back with mainframe systems, right?
Yeah, right. It took us a while to get it under control. We seem to have it now, though. We brought in some people who we found someone who had, through 40 Oaks, we found someone who had AS400 experience, UiPath experience, some web experience, and also we use ServiceNow. We hit directly to the ServiceNow, which is our ticketing system. We hit directly to that API. So we needed someone with the technical focus, and it was difficult to find someone. And we finally found someone that got us back on the right track, and now we're getting to where it's a lot easier to get into those mainframe systems and automate, because most of our back-end systems are on the mainframe. So we needed someone with that heavy experience.
Yeah, and I think, so your case is a little extreme, right, on the ends of the spectrum, but even Patrick, you touched on something similar in that, looking for technical resources that have experience in those kind of staple applications that really make up your tech stack and facilitate a lot of your business processes, and then kind of educating them in RPA or looking for a little bit of experience, right?
Yep.
being able to really create that bridge between the two systems.
Yeah, and I think to the point Lori just made, bringing those folks in who have that, SAP experience, Salesforce experience, things like that, along with RPA experience, it's going to make solutioning a lot easier when they understand how to hit those APIs or where those APIs lie and how you can utilize those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of, you have to blend the old and the new, right? And if you get too focused on RPA, you lose all that inherent knowledge of those applications that are really where the business processes are executing, right? So Lori, one of the things that you mentioned kind of, brought a question to mind. So you're talking about how, it took a long time to find the right people to put in place to automate the processes that you had identified. What was that journey like? It sounds like there were some challenges there. Where did you start, and what was the progression to this kind of successful point that you're at now?
Well, this is MSC's, not ours, our team, but MSC's third attempt at RPA. So the first time, I don't think it got off the ground. The second time, I think they couldn't find the ROI. And then we brought in a third party consultant firm. And I think there was just a lack of expertise there in the field, or maybe with the tool that we chose, the software that we chose. And so we failed then. We cut ties with that partner, and then we brought on some direct consultants to work for us who had the experience, the 5 years that we needed or we were looking for. And that seemed to help us get off the ground a lot quicker than all of the months that we spun the whole year before, with someone selling expertise to help us move forward in this process. So we're just now, this is fairly new to us, only a year old, and really, we really just get off the ground probably about 3 months ago. So
Right.
We're just now getting into seeing the savings and the ROI that comes with RPA.
Right.
So we had some struggles in the beginning, just working with external partners and finding the expertise we needed to work with the AS400. That seemed to be our biggest challenge.
Yeah, but it really becomes a unique kind of scenario, right? You need the technical acumen. You need somebody who's familiar with kind of RPA as a process. You need to meet that perception of speed that's going to come with use of a tool like this. But you also need that inherent knowledge of your environment to be able to navigate and to really be successful.
Yeah, that's so true. We luckily had someone on our team. We brought her in. She was a developer, an AS400 developer on the mainframe. So she had been with MSC for 17, 18 years. So we had her knowledge to bring in. But honestly, with a lot of our automations, originally we planned on doing RPA advisors. So we were going to have people in different business departments, and they were going to be citizen developers and build these, pseudo bots that they could just give us to our team, where we would solidify them, add error handling. That didn't end up working out because unless you're really focused on doing this work, you can't make this 10% of your day. It's kind of hard to have them focused in learning the tool, learning the technology, and then also automating their process, plus keeping up with their regular job. So we brought in a developer who was experienced on the mainframe, and we found having her help was it was such a huge help to have her background knowledge on the systems and the programs, because without that, we would have been spinning our wheels forever. So it's a fine balance with RPA, trying to find someone who, like you said, knows the systems and the programs in the company, also has the technology background, can use the tool and understand it and put all those things together. So it's a fine balance between those different areas.
And a balance that makes it interesting going through the hiring process or finding the partner process, right? You really have to have that level of trust that you can straddle that line, right?
Yeah, right. So, when you're leading a COE, the Center of Excellence, it's like you have to wear many hats when you don't already have that expertise in place, right? So the RPA lead, it's a Scrum Master, it's the architect, making sure the architecture, the infrastructure is up in place, and making sure servers have what they need. And so it's been interesting figuring all these little pieces out that go along with RPA. We originally thought it would be, okay, we have a partner come in, we set it all up, we go, right? It just ended up being a lot more complicated than that. I don't know if the others experienced that, but.
Anthony, we got two really interesting questions.
Okay. Let's see what we have here. I got wrapped up in our conversation. I didn't.
Oh yeah, no worries, no worries. But I
Patrick-
saw those
Patrick
come
got
up
it.
and I thought that they were interesting. So sorry to take that from you.
Yeah, sure. So, Lori, there was a question that came in specifically for you about ROI and benefits, and what your criteria is, to evaluate those, the benefits and the ROI. Do you want to maybe expand on that a little bit as you were
Sure.
kind of talking about your program?
So our program, when it came in, it was originally for finance. And when we brought it into IT, it had to pay for itself. So we're really ROI centered. So we have to find the most bang for our buck. So we go off FTE savings. So we meet with a business partner from a different department, get with them, see how long it takes for them to do their manual task. And we put it into this newly created savings calculator spreadsheet that tells us how many minutes it takes, what the bot did according to the logs, because we built a logging mechanism that reports out how many transactions the bot does, and includes business exceptions and technical exceptions, so we know we get the raw data. We pull that in and use that calculation to figure out how many FTE savings we have. So we report on that to upper management every week. Did that answer your question? I hope that answered.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what you're highlighting is, the level of reporting and kind of, I don't want to say live, but really, really up-to-date reporting that needs to be provided on the execution of the bot, right? Or
Yeah.
the execution of the automation.
Yeah, and when looking for the work, we have to make sure we're really bringing in work that's providing those savings. Like a lot of our work right now is IT work for our IT team that does the help desk tickets. So we have one bot that covers 29% of their daily task work in a month. So we're finding things like that give us a lot of bang for a buck, a lot of savings. So those people can be moved to project work instead of that tedious daily work, That's
Yeah.
how we base our program. Ours is all built on what are we saving.
Right. I mean, the efficiency is in the capacity of people that doesn't have to perform that task any longer, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of, especially a year or two ago, the idea or the thought process was that we would actually use the software to save, resources like actual FTEs, which I think does happen from time to time. But I think what people have started to come around to is understanding that this is really like an efficiency play, and that we can recoup portions of people's time in order for them to do the tasks that software can't do anymore, right? Or can't do yet.
Yeah, MSC runs very lean, so as it is. So it's a huge help for some of those teams, like those help desk teams, to take that work and be able to do project work and leave, the bot to run, 60 transactions when that would take them days to do that manually.
Right. Right.
I would just jump in and say, absolutely. I think that we had to focus on FTE as well. How many hours are we saving? I think something I'm exploring right now in my current capacity is ROI is so tricky to calculate, because you're trying to, first tally up the total cost, but then the total benefits. And, my last project, we were doing audit compliance. And so how can you quantify some of these qualitative measures like rework involved with audit compliance and increased employee morale and some of these other measures? So how do you maybe help leadership pivot against not just focusing on ROI, which is kind of an arbitrary number, but build out some other metrics that can be captured?
Yeah, you had to get creative, right?
Yes.
Do you use a logging mechanism, either of you, Lillian or Patrick? Do you have like a logging where it logs like how many transactions and reporting?
Yeah, so we log everything to a SQL database, which Power BI sits on top of. But we take the time savings approach, but we also we move a lot of inventory, a lot of coats moving around. So we've built a couple automations that help consolidate to reduce freight costs. So we have a lot of hard savings or even soft savings outside of time savings and a lot of risk avoidance. You know, we do a lot of import export as well. So around quality going through customs, things like that. But we've broken it down. So, you know, each task saves X amount of time or X amount of dollars per transaction. And we use that, you know, based off of the number of transactions to calculate what the savings are today against the initial cost. And there was also another part of this question, like how do you identify what to do? So one of the criteria we use is generally we're not going to work on anything that doesn't pay back within a year. So a payback period of 1 year or less. And then from there, we've got a moving backlog. So until we have a business case solidified and a technical scope agreed to, anything can shift. But like once we get it over to the development team, then it's locked in. You know, it's going to stay in its place and it's going to go through the life cycle.
Would you say, Patrick, that the ROI calculation and some like the selection were the biggest challenges that you've faced, or have there been other things that have kind of reared their head that you've had to overcome to make your program successful?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, what the ROI looks like is super straightforward. But in other instances, like freight savings, you know, you really have to kind of, there's a lot of factors that go into that. You know, there's 25 different things that could affect, you know, freight costs. So you really have to figure out how you're going to account for that and measure that appropriately. I think the thing that we've done a good job of here, because it's bit me a couple times in the past, the one that kind of sneaks up on you is support. You know, so as you get more and more bots in production, you know, you're going to have user-based failures, or, you know, the end of the month, you're in SAP when they're trying to close the books, you're going to have timeout issues, things like that. So having the necessary level of support to keep all bots running in production and getting those fixed in a, you know, an appropriate amount of time, that's the biggest thing that I can recommend for anybody, is have a good support plan in place when you're starting the program, so that when you hit whatever that scale of bots is, you can start addressing those concerns.
That's a really good point.
Actually, I'm curious, Patrick, what your experience is in having a separate sustainment team, because I would agree with you. Our team started seeing those issues where the maintenance and sustainment piece was requiring a lot of developer time, and we hadn't quite budgeted that correctly. And so it was taking away the potential time to create new automations. So
right.
What's your experience in having that separated as another?
So having it separated can be difficult, you know, because they're not always going to know the nuances of how or why something was built the way that it was. So where I've had the most success is you have a rotation. You know, so you have the developers kind of going through and they'll be on support for like 2 weeks instead of new development. Or you can go with the model, if you built it and it breaks, you fix it. Because who's going to fix it, you know, more efficiently than the person who built it.
Interesting.
What about you, Lillian? What are some of the challenges that you've faced?
Well, working in the military space, we had a lot of infrastructure issues and a lot of bureaucracy to get through. And so that was a good portion of our time. You know, thankfully, we had a champion who was pushing through some of those infrastructure issues with licensing, with credentials, with security, servers, virtual machines, that kind of thing. But that was a heavy lift, and we kind of moved a little bit slower than I think my team would have liked. But, you know, shout out, I had a great program manager who was overseeing those things and really trying to push our client through on that too. But that was our biggest struggle.
Yeah, the red tape will really, you know, kind of slow your program down, right? And I think that also plays into this like kind of quality and support topic that we were just talking about, right? Like how, you know, how much red tape is enough red tape to make sure things turn out in a sustainable way, and how much is too much that it slows it down to a point where you're not getting anything done.
Sure, and those measures, of course, are in place for good reason, and you know, people are very protective about the data and information. And of course we want to respect that, but it's also taking that risk aversion and helping to educate folks on what software robots can and cannot do. And they certainly cannot go rogue, and they're not going to do anything that they're not scripted to do. So it's an educational process as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
I was going to say there's a really interesting question that ties into this. So in the finance industry, what is the best way to approach, highly regulated systems? And I worked in the finance industry and in utilities, both highly regulated. And the best way is to kind of do a roadshow and explain what the tool is and how it can help, and not just the business partners, but how they can use it within their systems too. Managing support tickets, support queues, things like that. But I found that it works better to have those conversations before you bring them an idea, so let them kind of mull it over, and then when you come back with an idea, they're not sitting there for the first time like, what is this? Why are you talking to me?
Right.
That being said, there are systems that they just straight up wouldn't give me access to. They're like, you're never going to get access to this. So it could definitely be more challenging in those industries.
Right. I think it's an anecdote that I'll add in, which I think also ties into one of the other questions that we got here, is that I got a lot of that same pushback when I was in my previous role running an automation COE. And one of the ways that we got around that, there was twofold. One is through citizen development. So if I could tell that, especially in finance, where they're very protective over the, salary information and financial information of the company, that their own resources would be the support arm for a bot that was built, or maybe built with the support of an expert. They became more comfortable with that idea because the sustained access was limited. And then the other concept that we layered in was that the bot would actually be their digital employee. And the way that we would explain it to them is that we weren't just building them an automation, we were giving them a digital worker that had 24 hours of capacity that they could then use, assuming that they could give it enough tasks to do inside their organization. And therefore, that age-old tenet of, not having a finance person, have access to your HR system and create a huge liability is preserved, and it becomes much more comfortable for people. So I don't know if any of you have, had that type of experience as well, but those were a couple of things that worked for me inside those systems, and dealing with the kind of the thought process of some of the leaders in allowing that access to for the bot and for the team to kind of occur.
Yeah, we have ours separated as well by digital workers that report to each department area, and they're for separation of duties. So we have our own menu within the mainframe, and it's broken out. So not every bot has access to every menu item.
Right.
Like the IT has elevated access, so they can't get into that. The AR bot, we don't want the AR bot going into the IT section, so to be able to offboard associates. So we have our separation of duties that way as well, where they have their own bot ID that goes to that department.
Yeah. Do you see the same, Owen?
Yeah, that's right. That was the concern as well, the separation of duties and being cognizant of that and trying to respect that. Yep, I would agree, Lori.
Cool. Lillian, there's another question that I think you're well suited to answer around, what's the lowest hanging fruit in finance departments? What are some of the processes that you usually see get automated first and most successfully?
Sure. I think some of the easiest automations that my team experienced was simple report pulling from different ERPs. And so if there is a financial analyst who every week needs to go into the ERP and pull down a report and put it in Excel and format it, send it up to their supervisor, I mean, that's pretty low hanging fruit. That's not even inputting anything into the systems. It's just straight data pulling. But that ended up saving a lot of time for a lot of different people, because maybe they're disparate systems and they're pulling from 5 different ERPs and consolidating that information and comparing from the last week, doing some calculations. Maybe it saves them a couple hours every week. And so that's really an easy win, in my opinion. And then I think you start looking by function. So maybe, as Lori was just mentioning, accounts payable, accounts receivable, the invoice processing, that kind of thing. I think that's as well an easy sell to leadership, because Anthony, you had mentioned at the beginning with finance, they're cyclical. I mean, this is happening every month. You know that this is going to happen. You know the kind of information that you're looking for. And so that's as well pretty easy to start with.
Right. A lot of those activities in AP and AR really boil down to reconciliation, comparing two sources and making sure they zero out. And as long as those sources are consistent, you can have a lot of success with RPA. And then financial analysis, which I think you mentioned as well, right? Reporting
That's
on a
right.
week-to-week basis, right? What, where are we with that same consistent level of trending, over time? Perfect. Thank you for that. And Lori or Patrick, any suggestions on like where to start in the finance area before we move on?
Ours were more of like matching, three-way match system, credit increases for credit checks. It just goes out to a website, checks for credit increases. We have another one that flips POs into invoices and sends them out for processing, simple things like that.
Right.
Yeah, we've done a lot with credit. It sounds similar to what you've done, Lori, but we have to do periodic credit checks on all of our customers to make sure that we should get paid. And this is like thousands of credit reports that have to be retrieved on a periodic basis from a few systems, and we have a bot that just goes out and pulls all of those reports.
Getting paid is important, right?
Yep.
It's always nice to get paid.
Yeah.
Great. Well, so one of the other topics that has come up a few times in our comments has been this concept of citizen development or business users developing. Where do you guys stand on that? How has it helped or hurt the progress of your programs? Patrick, do you want to start?
Yeah, you probably see it in my face, huh? So when I was at the utility company, they actually shut down citizen development because they didn't have the proper governance around it. And it came to light that within the same business unit, a couple people were automating the same process. So my personal opinion is, unless you have like unlimited funds, I wouldn't kind of just issue licenses to anybody who wants it. That can raise segregation of duty issues, PII issues, things like that. So what I've seen in my past that's been successful is more of like a quote unquote satellite model, where a centralized COE is responsible for the overall program and governance. And then you set up little satellite pods within business units of people who are going to dedicate time to the program, and they get trained as developers. They run their own pipeline, run their own intake, and then like code reviews, publishing to production, all of that is maintained by the central COE, so that you still have that governance structure in place, and nothing's going to go into production that shouldn't, for a variety of reasons. And I think one of you mentioned it, Lori, you mentioned it earlier too. You can't dedicate like 10% of your time to it.
Right.
So you want to make sure that these licenses are getting utilized to their fullest potential. And with that, you need to have agreement from those executive sponsors and those business units that these people who are going to be in that development pod can dedicate a meaningful amount of time to make sure that the licenses are utilized properly.
Yeah, and if they don't use those skills, they lose them, right? So if they're not consistently developing, they're not going to be able to take something and even give a bare bones automation. We found it was just really difficult to have someone just sit down as 10% of their time and create the automation. They really needed more time than that. I mean, they just weren't, it didn't work out for us. So we originally had that plan for kind of like the satellite setup, like you were talking about. It just didn't work out just for our company, because they didn't have enough people to just dedicate that full time. If they could pull, one or two people from each department and have them fully dedicated to doing those automations, creating those bare bones automations, it would have been easier, but we found it easier just to have a center of excellence. So we do everything in ours. We meet with the business and get a recording of their manual tasks, and then we take everything and develop and put it into production. What about you, Lillian? Do you have citizen developers?
A customer that I'm supporting right now is rolling out RPA as a service. And so they have licensees that they're pushing out across the enterprise. And so Patrick, I was keen to hear your experience and takeaways, because that is exactly the issue that I was highlighting is, but what about your code reviews? And if you're going from the developing environment into production, I mean, what is that checkpoint? What is that milestone? And really needing to build that out and be very robust about it.
Right. And who's to say that without the code review, the calculations or whatever they've put into that are correct?
Yeah.
Especially when you're going to be working with financial data. That always gives me heartburn. So.
And also because so the user agreement when they apply for the license is that, yes, I'm going to take the vendor training, I'm going to do all of the development, exercises. And I mean, nobody's enforcing that either. And so it's really even assuming that they know exactly how to use the software and, just highlighting that as a caution as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we were going to do the citizen developer model, we decided to do the training together. So we had courses that were set up every week where we'd spend an hour or two and just a touch point. What did you do? Did you get all the modules? I split up the modules between the weeks. Did you get these done? Where are you? What did you learn? Kind of discuss and give ideas back and forth. But it's still difficult because they couldn't dedicate the time.
At least you had that kind of accountability because it's on their honor. Yes, I'm checking this box. I've taken all the training. And
right.
Okay, again, is that enforceable? I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we actually, when I was leading, a hands-on program, we really built out a really robust citizen development arm. I've always viewed it as the way to answer your support question. And like I was mentioning before about finance, like how do you, get buy-in from them to get access to systems and whatnot. So we trained close to 200 people. And what really occurred to me, it was a training challenge, but I think something that Patrick touched on really became evident to me is that it was really about governance, and how do you get people to play by the rules? Because I was an IT professional, Laura, you're an IT professional, or at least grew up that way, right? So we're used to kind of going through change boards and having people look over your shoulder and make sure that things were done right, and you understand why that needs to be done. But that type of, kind of structured progression isn't always, isn't the same as in business units all the time. There's double checking and a hierarchy that's followed, but it's not always as structured as a system as we would have in IT. So really getting people to understand that, in my mind, is kind of part of the digital transformation that this software is allowing us to achieve in bringing people into this kind of like more IT mindset and bringing some of the business practices more into IT. And really coming up with this new governance structure that's going to allow us to operate with a high level of technology, inside of our business process. And one of the things that I think goes along with that, and there's a couple questions about this that have come up, is not just governance of the technology as it moves through the process, but governance of your idea pipeline, right? And how do you liaise with your different business units to make sure that you have the right prioritization? And how do you maintain a backlog of ideas? So maybe we can touch on that a little bit. Laura, you mentioned specifically that your team kind of does it all. So maybe you can start and explain a little bit of how you liaise with those business groups and maintain that pipeline, and then we can move through the group.
We had quite the backlog built up when we started this, just from going out to different areas and speaking and through word of mouth, hearing about RPA, and they would kind of bring some ideas to us. So we've been just taking the approach of looking through those, seeing which one they marked as FTE savings, reaching out to them. We usually just take 1 or 2 sessions and let them record the manual process, have them fill in all the blanks that we need, and we take it and run with it. That's the way we've been doing it. But again, we have someone who's been with MSC for 17, 18 years, and she understands a lot of those processes. So she knows those programs and a lot of what needs to be done on those, so we can get those done fairly quickly. If we didn't have that expertise, I think it would have been a bigger issue, you know, to go through these programs, but.
Right. It's kind of like procuring that operational expertise from an internal resource.
Right, yeah, it's been a huge benefit to us. And again, we are just now getting started with our program, so we don't have a ton of different areas. We have 6 or 7 automations from different areas that we're doing so far. So I'm sure that process will evolve as we move forward. But right now, that's pretty much, we lean a lot on that one resource who has a lot of knowledge.
Interesting. What about you, Lillian? How do you see that governance taking place, and how do you identify your backlog and maintain it?
Our team tried to weigh out the complexity of developing a certain automation against the estimated benefits it would bring, and trying to rack and stack that way. So we also, again, from a military perspective, a lot of things were dictated top down, and that's really difficult to always be inserting our opinion about, well, yes, you know, leadership, you want to do things that are, you know, at this level, but you have to also think about all the people who are at the worker bee level who are saying that these are the processes that really should be prioritized. And so we were in the middle trying to mediate between leadership dictates and what you know, bottom up workers are saying are important processes. So really trying to construct what is that prioritization model based on the, you know, what is leadership's priorities in general. So again, I'd mentioned in the finance realm, audit readiness, compliance, that was really important, but also, you know, process efficiencies. And so we tried to rack and stack according to leadership's grand ideas of what's important to them, while also, you know, bubbling to the surface what we were hearing on the ground. No kidding, the workers are saying these are the right processes. So bringing everything all together, we did have a governance board of people, the leaders, not quite at the SES level in the government, but you know, more at the 14, 15 level. And we brought this to the board and said, these are our recommendations. We're bringing this before you. Ultimately, you get to decide, but this is why we prioritized it this way. Interesting balancing act to try to achieve success with. What about you, Patrick?
We've got a really great steering committee. So we have a top-down approach, which really helps make things a priority. And with that, we go out and I kind of, you know, like I shop for ideas. I do road shows with different leaders around the company just to understand what their appetite is for automation, and then get direction on who to work with to kind of scope those out. But generally, like I said earlier, we look at anything that's going to have a 1-year payback period or less. And we've got really big complex projects, and we've got smaller projects that still have that payback period that we can knock out fairly quickly. And so we try to make sure that each developer is resourced appropriately with maybe 1 big project and 2 smaller ones, you know, so that as you hit natural stopping points with access or code reviews or whatever, they can switch over to the next one. But with that, we always prioritize the big ones first and get them in the door with the developers. And then as those smaller ones come in, we just slot them in. And that's guidance that our steering committee is okay with. As long as we're achieving the proper ROI for these, they give us a lot of latitude to make those decisions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there definitely has to be flexibility, right? Just as we try to marry all these different processes together and try to have as many resources working on as many things at the same time as possible, right? Whether it's working on it themselves or working as a citizen developer. And that also just brings up something, you know, around role definition. That was also another question that came in. How do you define the roles on your team? Is it just a automation person, or do you have analysts and developers and project managers and all sorts of things? How are you guys handling that?
At least in our world, we have analysts and developers. So the developers are just mainly focused on developing, but they manage support, they manage our service accounts and access to all of that. And on the analyst side of things, you've got people looking for ideas, you've got people designing ideas, you've got people managing the projects, so it's kind of an all-encompassing role in that sense. But I do encourage the analysts to get certified to develop, and if they want to develop kind of some of those, lower hanging fruit, I encourage that as well. So.
What about you, Lori? How are you defining roles across the program?
Our developers play a dual role. So originally we planned on having it separated where we would have QA person, we would have an analyst, and then a couple of developers. But because the way the team ended up working out, we have a very small COE. So now we have 3 RPA developers who play a dual role. So they work on the automation from the time it's picked up in requirements and take it all the way through production.
Lillian, what do you see? We had distinct roles. We had developers, analysts, we had a program manager, and we even had a solution architect at one point as well. Right. Yeah, the team that I ran, we definitely separated those roles. We found that it also created some of that flexibility, that Patrick was describing. So as we confirmed requirements effectively, we could start working on a project from a technical perspective, hopefully having some of the architecture kind of done first to figure out that we're moving in the right direction, have less rework, but really hand that off to an engineer is what we call them, and let them get into the meat of the build of the automation, while the analyst was obviously there to support, but then could move on to the next one and kind of have this like overlapping wave perspective that would allow us to parallel track as many as possible and evaluate each one of those ideas along the way to see if they were really worth moving into that next phase. So some kind of linear concepts, but also kind of like overlapping to make sure that we were as efficient as possible. It sounds like, Lily, you probably had something similar going on there. That's right. I mean, and as you were mentioning, as Patrick was mentioning, with the different projects being able to slot them in, I mean, we came to hard stops at so many points with our automations, and really having that backlog of being able to slot in other projects while developers were waiting or analysts were waiting for feedback or access to systems or whatnot. Yeah, that's kind of how we try to operate. Right. Well, hey, we're coming up on just the last couple minutes here. So I wanted to take the opportunity to give the 3 of you a chance just to, pass on, what do you really think it takes to automate? What is your sage advice? Lillian, do you want to kick us off? Sure. I think my advice would be to obtain buy-in on all the levels that are necessary. So certainly leadership having the insight to bring in this technology. And again, in my experience, just the top-down pushing. Yes, that's great. It's great to have the leadership willing to make that investment, but you really need to engage on all the levels, especially with subject matter experts who, again, maybe at the worker bee level. A lot of times, the people I was working with, we were trying to automate their tasks. And so making sure that they were enthusiastic about the technology, educating them as needed, alleviating their concerns and fears, because they're going to make or break that for you, adopting this technology. If they're resistant to it, if they don't want to give you the time of day to automate, to walk through the processes, to do the testing, it's going to fail on its face. So making sure at all levels that the organization is being briefed on what RPA is, all the benefits, how it's not a risk, it's going to enhance their work. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would second that. Buy-in is huge. And we've noticed that we're getting more buy-in as we're providing value to these teams. Now they're jumping in. In the beginning, it was kind of tough because they weren't really sure of RPA. No one's sure if it's going to take their job. In the beginning, it's kind of hard to get the buy-in from everyone. But once you get the buy-in and they really start seeing those savings from their own automations going in, those bots are running, I'm finding now they're jumping in, looking for ways where they can save time so they can get their project work done. So I would second that buy-in.
Yeah, I'll third that buy-in. Yeah, the biggest one, so where I've been in programs that struggled in the past, we did not have executive buy-in. where I do now, and that has been absolutely a game changer. But they can push down all they want. So if you don't get kind of the directors, the senior managers, the team leads on board, you're going to struggle with adoption. So you're going to build bots that don't get used as much as they should, and you're going to be struggling to maximize the ROI on that. So it's building those partnerships up and down those verticals, and really getting them to trust what you build. And making sure that what you build meets the original requirements, which seems like a silly thing to say, but in practical application, it's not.
Yeah. And getting them to dedicate the time to assist you when you need more
Right.
information to keep it moving, keep the process
Right.
moving.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really becomes an exercise in collaboration, right?
Mhm.
And really can't be successful without that collaboration. Whether it be while you're working your project through, while you're gathering the requirements, whether you're building out the bot, you really need to form these relationships and cross some of the boundaries that have traditionally been there between the business and an IT group, whether your COE is in the group or inside of IT or outside. I want to thank the three of you, for joining and sharing your experience. We had a great audience here today too. Really appreciate all the questions and the interest. We're coming to the end of the hour here. So we didn't get a chance to get to everybody's questions, but we'll follow up with you offline. If you think of other questions along the way, feel free to reach out to myself, reach out to Brett. And we hope you found the experience to be rewarding and insightful, and wish everybody a happy new year, and look forward to seeing everybody at the next Automation Insights.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, guys. Take care, everyone.